Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think this is our 28th episode, assuming we do them in order, of the Pediatric Practice Management Awesome Cast. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, say hello.
Hello, interwebs.
Brandon's here. Brandon and I have been on the road a lot lately. You're going to hear about that in a second. And it's always very interesting for both of us. I'll let Brandon tell his version of the story in a second. But what happens to me, I was out at the California chapter meeting, and then I was at the Massachusetts chapter meeting, and by chapter I mean AP chapter. Yeah. And then I was just at an IPA meeting in Cincinnati, and at two of those three, actually no, I take that back. At all three, someone said to me, "Wait, are you the guy from the podcast?" And I never know how to answer because I don't know, Brandon, if they think well, which guy do you think I And but it was funny. One of the people, actually, this was a client who came to Vermont last month to kick off, the going online with the EHR. And I'd walked into the room. There was a big room with a bunch of clients, like 20 clients in there, and a bunch of PCCers. We're all grabbing lunch, and someone turned around and said, "I know your voice."
Yeah. Well, I had a similar experience. I don't get out on the road as much as you do, so I don't experience that nearly. I've only actually once, and this was this past week, where I walked into, there was a miscommunication, and I showed up at a practice that I wasn't supposed to show up, so it was at a later day. I was supposed to be there the next day, and so the staff was scrambling because they felt embarrassed. They wanted, like, this guy is here and we don't know why he's here, and so they finally, I guess, arranged for me to meet one of the partners, and I walked in, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm Brandon," and stuff, and he's like, "I just watched you the other day on TV, or not on TV, but I just watched you the other day on a video, and now you're here. Like, what are you doing here?" He didn't know I was going to be there. But he thought it was just like, "That was cool. I just saw you 2 days ago talking about something, and now today you're here. I don't even know why you're here in the first place."
This is an intervention, and we're here. Brandon and I are now doing a reality show where if your office is screwed up enough, we come to your office with a camera.
Your office, and not to help you, just to laugh, just to
we could do that every other day for 2 years and never run out of practices to meet.
Yeah, well. You can start with mine, so I'll put myself on the list.
We've already got 20-odd episodes.
Perfect practice.
Yeah, so Brandon, let me ask, tell me about your trip. I know a lot about it, what happened, but at the same time, there's still a lot of details I don't know. Tell us what happened on your recent trip out here.
Here's what I did. In a previous episode, you guys are going to hear a little bit about some of the challenges that my practice or our practice is facing or dealing with. So make sure to catch that one. Well, I'm sure you would have already caught it, or watched it by now. If you haven't watched it and you're watching this video, make sure to watch the previous Awesome Cast where I talk a little bit about that. But so we have some challenges, and then also that I wanted to address. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to go out there and see what other practices were doing. Now, not necessarily specifically about some of my challenges, but also just in general. I think it's very beneficial to see the check-in process. Things that are simple. We always talk about perhaps kind of behind-the-scenes sort of things. We did a great episode on pricing. We've done, we've had people that, like Dr. Robin Warner, that showed us, she has an app. So we have these cool things that we've been talking about. But there's also, the day-to-day stuff that perhaps we take for granted. So I've been wanting to do this for a very long time, and so it presented the opportunity for me to fly to the East Coast, and I asked around in some of my people that I know from SOPM and things like that. I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, would you mind me going and visiting you, and then just sitting around like a fly on the wall and just observe what you got going on? I just want to see how you do things, and if you let me talk to your staff, great. If you don't, that's okay. I'm here just basically to chat and to observe." And they graciously said yes. And I can't tell you how welcome I felt when I went to each one of these practices. They welcomed me. They introduced me to my staff. Some of the doctors actually let me go into the examining room to see how they actually how they examine the patient while they were charting, because those were one of the challenges that we have, is kind of taking a long time to chart. So I wanted to see how other people charted and how they've set up their system. This practice coincidentally has the same setup that we do. And they've done an awesome job in setting up the system in a way that is just highly, highly efficient. So that's why I was there. But each one of the practices, so I visited 3 practices. Each one of the practice, was very unique. Each one of them did what I considered something very, very well, and I wanted to learn what that was. So it was great, Chip. Like I said, I went to 3 practices, 3 very, very different practices in different areas. One is in Connecticut. The other one is in New Jersey. And then the other one in Long Island, different sizes. It was interesting to see the differences. In one practice, I went there, and they had a lot of people in the front desk. I noticed, answering phone calls and doing a lot of the admin work. And then, I walked away because we only really have 2 people in the front, one check-in and one check-out, that also answers the phones and does a whole bunch of stuff. And then, the next day I'm thinking, well, I need more people. That's the solution. And then I go to another practice, and they only have 2 people, one check-in, one check-out, and do an awesome job. And I'm like, why aren't you guys not going crazy here? What is it that you do, for you guys? Don't you have, where's the phone calls and all this and that? So it was very interesting, and I got to get to the bowels, if you will, of each one of the practices and talk to the staff. I talked to the clinical staff. I saw one of the practices, they allowed me to go through the entire process from, wellness visit, what each one of the, what the MA does, what the nurse does, and then I was in the examining room, seeing how the doctor did the questions and how they documented. I also did that with a sick visit. So it was great. So why did I go? Well, I went to learn about how other people do other things. Chip, that's one of the things that I've always found most valuable about the seminars and the conferences that I go to. Oftentimes, you learn more by the interactions that you have in between sessions than you do at the actual session. So when you sit down for lunch break and you start talking, and then it's like, well, that speaker, I mean, that's great, but that would never fly, in my office. And then so you ask them, well, what do you do about this, and what do you do about that? And then they're like, oh, no, we just do this, or we just do that, or this is how we set it up. And you're like, that's great. Let me write this down, because it's practical information. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I started the blog, is because there wasn't anything out there that was nitty-gritty. There wasn't anything out there that showed me that was practical experiences. And that's what I got when I went there. So it was great. I mean, I just can't tell you. I've got notebooks. I mean, I got pages in my notebook filled of just. I'm like, wait, 1 second. Say that again. Wait. And then I would take screenshots of their screens, and I'm like, what about this? And I would write a note. I mean, I can't tell you how much info I got. But just really quick, I also got a chance to meet with Suzanne Madden from the Birding Group. Some of you guys out there know who she is. She's working on really cool stuff, and I was able to get kind of a nice little consulting session there. I spent 2 or 3 hours with her, and we were just talking in general about different things, some of the stuff that she's working on, but also some of the challenges. Later, I got to meet the guy that supports my IT. And here's the funny thing, Chip. He's been with us probably for 9 years. He supports our IT. He actually lives in Parsippany, New York, or New Jersey. What is it? No, New Jersey, Parsippany, New Jersey. Yeah. And I've only seen him twice in my entire life. And last Monday, so 1 week from yesterday, was the second time ever in 9 years that I had seen him face to face. So that just goes to show you the world that we live in now, that he's able to support me all the way from there, and then manage my network, my printers, my everything, all from there. And then I visited 3 practices, and then after that I had a PPMA meeting. PPMA, for those of you that don't know, which, by the way, I need to mention this because one of the things that we're trying to do is increase membership. So for those of you that don't know, we often talk about SOPM, the section on administration and practice management, where we always plug and say that you should be a part of if you're not. Now, the SOPM has a subcommittee called PPMA, which is the Pediatric Practice Managers Alliance, which, in my view, is what SOPM should have been, because this is really more for practice managers. We have our own listserv, and I'm part of the leadership team, and we're the ones that put together the webinars that the AAP does for practice management. We put together the NCE program that starts before the NCE, so this is the practice management. And one of the things that we've been thinking about is kind of increasing membership. A lot of people don't know about it. It's kind of behind, because SOPM is so big, it's kind of hard to get awareness or presence, because SOPM seems to like overpower us all the time. But anyways, I want to throw that out there because I'm part of that leadership, and we have some great resources lined up. And in NCE also, we're going to be talking about NCE San Diego this year. It's going to be about the theme is financial management, so budgeting, forecasting. And there's some other stuff in there I can't remember, but we were actually planning NCE 2015, Chip. That's what that's what we were planning during this meeting.
Well, one thing or two quick vignettes I'll share with you, and you know that I travel a fair amount for work, and I've visited countless pediatric practices, and I like doing it for the same reason that you just got to witness. You learn a tremendous amount. Every good story I tell, every number I come up with, anything that makes my contributions valuable comes from me visiting a real practice. Yeah. There are two stories that relate to that here at PCC. The first one is that we design software, and it's very easy when you're a software designer, a designer of anything really, to have a group of people making decisions about how the software will be used who aren't the people who actually have to use the software. And what we learned, we stole this saying that we use all the time from a software design marketing company, and it's an expression we use all the time, and that is the answer to your question isn't in this room. And what's meant by that is if you have 2 or 3 computer people arguing about the best layout of a screen or the order something should work in, they're not the right ones to ask and answer to answer the question. You really need to go to your customers' offices and ask them and have them show you. And so whenever we can, we send people on the road. We send people to real offices, and I make it a point for myself and for everyone I can who works here to actually go do training, and you learn more. We learn more about not only our software, but about the practices in general, the flow of an office. Like you pointed out, you have one office who's got a lot of people up at the front desk. You've got another office who has almost no one. There's no right answer. Right. But knowing how both groups of people make that happen and what the common elements are, that's really valuable to me. So
and you know what was really interesting too? One thing that I got to see people use the software that we use. And it's very interesting because one of the things that makes there's kind of I guess 2 trains of thoughts in terms of software, and you would probably speak better to this, but the 2 systems that we use, the EMR and the practice management system, are highly customizable systems. They were designed that way, so whatever your need is, whatever tickles you fancy, the software company can do it for you. As far as they've built flexibility into that. But the other thing is that you don't know what you don't know, right? So there's sometimes things that you never even think about asking the software company to do, or maybe like write a report, or maybe put this little thing on the screen so it can help you. And that was another thing. Like one of the things, I visited practices that 2 practices had similar. One had the exact same setup, and another one had the PM that we have, and then the other one I don't know what I didn't really go for PM or EMR for that practice. I was looking more on ways to incorporate other services into and specialists into the practice. That was kind of my objective with them. But then I was like, wait a minute, go back to that screen. Like I don't have that. So this is how you do this. And then so task number 1, when I get back, call my vendor, tell them to add this thing. And that was right there. I could have walked away. That little process saved me, I don't know how, well, not me, but the practice in general, countless minutes that added counts to hours, and I could have walked away and I could have flown back, and that would have been worth it right there, just noticing one little thing that they do.
I would tell anyone listening to us, Brandon, if you're running your practice and you feel like you're stuck in a rut, or you've got some problems that you can't manage, or you're just trying to get out of the same old issues that you run to every day, the first thing I would tell people is take a road trip. Yeah. Call some of your pediatric friends and go visit. It's 2 things will happen, all right? Number one, you're going to see solutions to your problems that you had never considered. Exactly what you just said. I see it all the time. Myself, I wonder about things. I go out and ask. That's number one. Number two, and this is human nature. You get the same thing when you go to visit someone's house, when you go to, when you're watching someone else's kids, when you go to someone else's practice. Everyone else's problems. When you go to see someone else's problems, you also are enlightened about your own practice. You will see things where you say, you know what, I might not be good, but I don't have that problem. And that little thing, someone else's problems sometimes are easier to solve than your own. I mean, you see this all the time. It's easy to be objective about something that you don't actually have to own. And that perspective, when you come back to your office, allows you to revisit some of the challenges you have. Brandon, you and I, we should create a practice swap. What's that show on TV, like wife swapping or whatever, husband swapping, spouse swapping, whatever they call it. Yeah. We should have interested practices.
You can misinterpret that. I don't like that. We need to come up with a better name.
Yeah, but no, we'll call it like practice swap.
Yeah.
Or partner swap. No, that sounds bad. We'll figure something out. But the whole point of it is people sign up, and then what if you went and spent 2 or 3 days in another practice and made notes like you did? I mean, I'm preaching to the choir when I'm talking to you, so I'm talking to the rest of our audience. I'll ask you a softball. How rewarding was this trip for you, Brandon?
I just can't tell you how much valuable this trip was. I wish I would have done it earlier, because this idea, really, I got to pay props to Lynn Kramer. For those of you that don't know, Lynn Kramer is a practice manager in a practice in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I believe.
Lancaster, yep.
Yeah, and she's been a big proponent of this, and she's actually, not only has she visited practices, but she sends her staff, several people to other practices that spend a day or two. So she's definitely, already. She was the one that kind of gave me the idea several years ago, and I've actually been trying to go to her practice for years, but I can't just quite find the time, and
it's not easy to get to either.
Yeah, and it's hard to go. I mean, yeah, it is very valuable, but you're a few days out of the office. It is an expense. So there is.
Yeah, but sending you, it's not like when you left the office, people had to stop seeing patients.
Right.
And I also think one thing that you did really well, I mean, that just sort of heightened the impact, is you found practices who are using your PM-EHR combination. And I would suggest that to anyone. You don't have to be one of our clients or have the same matchup that Brandon has. If you're regardless of who your vendor is, ask your vendor, can you give me the names of some practices who have the same system? Maybe you already know people, and visit each other. It's a huge benefit.
And even if like that would be choice number one. But I also think, and I didn't get to do this because that wasn't. I mean, there was only a limited amount of time, and it wasn't like I was able to stay 2 days at the practice. So maybe just I think that maybe we did what we scheduled for maybe a couple of hours. And I ended up staying maybe for 4 hours, but I mean that was kind of the extent that I was able to be there. So, but even looking at another system, I mean I think that there's value in that because there's other ways that other systems have solved different problems, and then later you can go back and customize as well. So yeah, I agree with you that that's option number one. But even if there isn't, even if you want to visit a practice and they have an entirely different setup in terms of technology, I think it's still valuable to see how they do things. Because you can ultimately go back and then kind of rearrange stuff or ask the vendor to say, hey, we're looking to have this screen, or this is the problem that we were trying to solve. We saw somebody else solve it this way. What can we do? And I would say 9 out of 10 times, I wouldn't say, at least with the vendors that I work with, 9 out of 10 times they will be able to do something for me.
Yeah. Well, so here's my other quick story. So years ago, I worked with someone whose wife wrote a book or was involved in a study where she interviewed the industry leaders of all kinds of businesses all over the country. Airline executives, bankers, the one I remember is the #1 rodeo clown in the country, people who had risen to the top of their respective endeavors to try to find threads of variables that they all had in common that allowed them to excel as leaders and more importantly, to be creative in their industries. Like, so these are people who change the face of their particular niche.
Okay.
Some creativity. And I remember that they identified 3 things that almost every one of these leaders and innovative, creative thinkers had in common. And I only remember one of the 3, though, because it struck me so heavily. I honestly don't remember. I should look it up. But but this was like the number 1 thing that they had in common is that they all traveled a lot, especially when they were younger. But but even after they were younger, they continued to travel. And what the discussions bore out was the experience of meeting other people and see how other people live their lives and solve their problems and succeed and fail in different ways, expanded their views of what's possible and how to solve certain problems. And that I remember just that part of that story so clearly because it always struck me. And that it was literally the nature of the travel. It was just simply seeing how other people do things helps you avoid the mistakes that surround you every day.
Absolutely. Well, to tie into that, I've been reading a book called Mastery. If you're interested in knowing the book, it's by Robert Greene, and Greene is like Greenie, so Greene. And it's called Mastery, and it's kind of like how do you reach this level of mastery in your craft. And the book goes through all these different people, from Leonardo da Vinci to Charles Darwin to all these different characters all throughout time. And one of the things, before he gets into that, he kind of explores the first couple of chapters in how human beings used to learn. How did they learn how to do things before there were books, before there were all this other stuff? And this ultimately is one of the things that, well, he argues that the opposable thumbs and all this other stuff in terms of human beings reaching a certain level of intellectual capacity isn't so much the opposable thumbs, but rather the front lobe of the brain that allowed us to observe. So then he goes on to like the time with like I don't know, medieval times or whatever, where there was apprenticeships. So there was no books or anything. You sat and you watched, whoever that person, the ironsmith guy, or the carpenter, and you sat there and you're watching. He says that that's really is how we were wired to learn. So there's books and there's stuff like that, but there's something to be said about this observing people doing their things that allows you to learn a lot more. So anyway, so he goes into a very long process about apprenticeship. And in the different ways you can apprenticeship. So sometimes you can apprenticeship in the traditional way where you hang out with somebody for so long. But now there's different ways where you can do your own apprenticeship, et cetera, et cetera. But it goes along with what you're saying in terms of visiting other people, in terms of just observing and watching, and some of the things that you're mentioning about traveling. I mean, that's really observation. You're going out there to learn new things. I wanted to mention that, so that kind of goes along with what you're saying. Here's another very interesting thing that I just listened to a podcast while I was driving home from dropping off my kids. I listened to the Motley Fools. I don't know if people know that, but it's kind of like a stock market kind of a thing about companies' earnings and macroeconomic sort of thing. And they were interviewing the CEO of Motley Fool was interviewing Malcolm Gladwell. So if those of you that don't know, he's also another famous author, does all kinds of stuff. And in fact, I'm reading one of his books also called Blink, how we make assessment within the first 30 seconds of anything, that we don't really need more data or anything. It's just like we've already made up our minds. But anyways, it's a very interesting book. But he was telling a story, his story, it's all about the premise. I think it's called David and Goliath. So the whole premise of the book is how the underdog, research shows that the underdog always outperforms the head honcho or the big guys. And why is that? So it seems like we have a misconception in terms of what we think success looks like. So he told the story about a guy in Silicon Valley that he's from India and has no idea anything about basketball, no idea whatsoever, but he decides to coach his daughter's basketball team. And so while he's observing the game and trying to learn, he doesn't understand, he thinks basketball is backwards. He's like, the way Americans play basketball does not make any sense whatsoever. He's like, one example was, why does, after you make a basket, do you retrieve all the way back and protect your basket, right? So if you're the underdog, you're basically allowing the person to, allowing the other team to travel, more than 75% of the court, and give them a better chance of doing what they do better. So let's go say you're the underdog. You're not very good against this other team. So you score, and then you retreat back to your zone in order to protect it. And he's like, the better option is a full court press. So they said you need to make everybody up front. And so basically he addresses his kids, his daughter, and he's like, listen, I have no idea about basketball. And you guys have no skill whatsoever, because these are all Silicon Valley kids. So they don't do sports. They're thinking about being marine biologists and software designers. So what they do is one of their techniques is full press court. So they're always putting pressure, and not letting. So they ended up winning. But the scores were like 6-0. That's what they would do, and then they wouldn't have to go to the championship. But my point with this whole story is that you have somebody that is thrown into this environment, and instead of playing by the rules, he comes from an environment where he has no conception or preconceived notion of how to play this game. He points out some of the stupidity that he observes, and then he tries to come up with a different game plan. But it could only have worked from somebody that came from the outside that had no preconceived notions about what happened. So to tie in the story, when you're in your office, you start limiting yourself to just trying to answer the questions to your problem based on the circumstances that you have. And by removing yourself and going to another office, you kind of become like this guy that I just described, where then you're not confined to how you solve problems. All of a sudden you see other things, and then when you come back to your practice, it gives you a much different perspective, because your mind now is completely open to different things. So now you don't solve the problems that you have trying with the same kind of approach that you've been trying over and over and over again, and you haven't been able to accomplish. One thing, for example, is our check-in process. We have done everything that we can think about trying to improve our check-in process. It takes forever. We don't know. We have them fill out the forms before, we call them, we check eligibility, and we do all these things, but we have yet to crack the nut on how we can do it very efficiently. Well, guess what I saw done very, very well at these practices? Check-ins. So I took notes, and some of the solutions were very simple, but it was impossible for me to see them because I was so embedded in my own little four walls. So that was basically a really long way to tell you one thing that I learned.
Yeah, we call that at PCC, we call that the sacred cow problem, where we know there's a problem, and we know what we even have some ideas how to solve it, but because it's the way we've always done stuff, we don't address it, and no one wants to.
That was very valuable for me when I first became a practice manager, because I've never was in the healthcare business. So when I asked questions, everybody was like, well, this is how we do it. And I was like, but give me a good reason why you do it that way. And if anybody could not, after 2 or 3 times that I asked the question, nobody could give me a reason that I was satisfied with, then I'm like, nobody has a freaking clue. So I'm going to do my own thing, because nobody really has a good reason why this can't be done. So I ran with a whole bunch of stuff because nobody could give me a good reason.
Right. And the other thing I'll add is, I read, and Brandon and I read SOAPM all the time, and you will see daily questions about how people address things, and sometimes a question gets asked, and you'll see an answer on SOAPM, and I can tell that the answer isn't popular because no one says anything. Sometimes there's silence. Yeah. Or,
that seems to happen with me. Like when I post something, like there's be a long thread, I say something, and then it's radio silence. I don't know.
That happens to me like more than half the time.
Did people think it's stupid, so they're not even going to waste their time addressing it, or did I tell them the truth and the truth hurts, or I don't know what it is. I'm like,
I just pretend that what I said was so awesome, nothing else needs to be said.
That it stunned them. They were like stunned when they read it.
But here's the thing: when you can be assured that every one of those practices who provides a response that doesn't quite gel with your experiences is in fact alive and running and seeing patients every day and making money. Some better than others, of course, but the only way you'll ever really be able to believe or validate what you see from these practices is to visit them. You have to see how people accomplish
Here's
things.
another thing that I'd like to add about when you come back, because there are so many different ways, and you have to have an open mind. So in fact, I was already running into, when I was sharing a few of the things that I had learned, that was automatically getting people, well, that won't work, or this, well, our patients are different, or if I would suggest that to patients, it's hard enough to get them to do this. Imagine them asking them to do that. And I was trying to, because I'm energized and I got these ideas, I'm like, I'm not suggesting that we do it exactly like these other people do it, but instead of saying this won't work because, let's turn the question around and say, how can we make this work? Okay, so it won't work exactly like this, but there's got to be a way that works within our environment that we can achieve a similar result. So I often think that that's a very important part, because if you go out there and you learn all these things, and you come back and everybody's like, oh, that's BS, or that won't work, then your trip is not going to have any value whatsoever. So it's very important to frame the right questions when you come back. Yes, it doesn't work, or yes, we don't have the staff. So let's start asking questions. Is it worthwhile adding a staff member? How much money do you think will the staff pay for themselves? If it doesn't, then maybe we can find a part-timer, or maybe we can just find a doctor.
It also, Brandon, let's say you've got a long-running problem in your practice, and you think about it and you think about it, and then you finally come into your office, one morning and say, okay, here's our new solution. This popped out of my head. This is what we're going to try. And you do that enough, and your staff sort of gives you the eye roll, like, oh, this is another untested idea of Brandon's. But when you come back from a practice and you say, look, guys, I saw this in action. This isn't my idea, but this is how they solved the problem that we all agree that we have, and it really does work. This isn't something I made up. This isn't something I read in a book. This is something I saw with my own two eyes. It gives you some legitimacy.
Right.
I see that. I have to, I tell crazy stories all the time about things I've seen and people I know, but when I say, do you want the name and number of the practice that I'm talking about, they'll stop and say, okay, so maybe, you're not making up. I don't have to ever make up a story when I do in the work I do.
Here's another that kind of goes along those lines. This wasn't with a practice related, but it was with another project that I was doing. And I often get frustrated with, sometimes when I do project for this organization or this leadership team, because it's like, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. Everything is I don't like this, I don't like that, but nobody offers any solutions. So what I did is I created something and I sent it out, and I said, I'm willing to, it's not like I think that it's great. This is just my first run through, but here's what I want to listen to. First I want to hear the things that you really like about this. Let's start out there. And then the things that you think, not that are bad, but things that would enhance the piece. That's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear what you don't like. I want to hear what you think would enhance it. And here's the other thing. When you say, I don't like the wording on that, don't just say, I don't like the wording on that. I need you to write up the wording that you think is the best wording, so we can, the narrative, or those colors don't work very well. All right, well then what colors do you think would work well? Because it's really easy to, to start criticizing and just start doing all this and that. That's really easy. But it's funny because when I throw it back sometimes to my staff members, it's like, well, I would love, what we need to do. We need to do this and this and that. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So have you thought about all these things? You're going to need to staff it. There's somebody going to be there. So who's willing among you to go and take a weekend and sit and set up a booth, for example, because there was some sort of a fair, and then they thought, we should be in this fair, and they're like, nobody's willing to give up their weekend, right? So it's just like, so okay, I have a million ideas too, but there's, first, be very cognizant about when you're giving the feedback about, okay, it's not just simply saying no, but also offer feedback that says, okay, well, I don't think that's very great, but here's what I propose. Two, and then that's one, and then two is kind of don't just simply say this won't work without having a plan, because that doesn't really further the conversation.
Right. I couldn't agree more. So let's change subjects now. You and I could talk about places we visited forever. I always end up doing that anyway. You were telling me about some feedback you'd gotten on your partnership blog piece. So why don't you remind our lovely audience what the premise of your partnership blog piece was, and then you and I can have a little discussion about it.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting story, and I'll try to be as politically correct as I can, because the genesis of it was well, I got upset, let's say that. So I was asked to write a piece for a newsletter of a well-known entity within our circles.
I forgot about this part of the story.
Yeah, so I thought about the audience of where this newsletter was going, and I said this would be a perfect audience, because the piece that I eventually wrote had been in my mind for a little while, and I just said, well, this would be a good opportunity to sit down and put some of these things down. So I wrote the 7 reasons why partnerships are overrated. And you can go to my blog. It's only just a few posts down. It's not. I wrote it fairly recent. And I got the nastiest response from the person, whoever was in charge of deciding what goes into the newsletter, basically telling me that, like, how insensitive I was and how I didn't understand the audience and all this other stuff. And it was a pretty nasty email. I thought it was very rude, especially because I was solicited. That's the part that kind of got me the most mad, because then they made it seem as though your submission, is not worthy enough for our publication. And I'm like, wait a minute. You specifically called me to ask me to write a piece, and they're like, Brandon, we love what you write, so do what you do. Basically is what they told me. We love how you...
But due to technical difficulties, I had to cut Brandon off midstream. We're going to pick up right where he left off, where he was telling us how he'd been asked to write a piece about why being a partner is overrated, and Brandon, we're going to pick up where you left off. Go.
Yes. So I think I was talking about how I got a nasty email, but anyways, that will tie in. The reason why I told that story is because once I said I wasn't going to waste a good post, so I went ahead and posted it on my website. And that post has gotten a great response. I've gotten a lot of people that have written to me, as well as just called me. I got about, I don't know, I wouldn't say a whole bunch. I think I've gotten about 2 calls of random doctors that showed up out of nowhere telling me, I said, I can't, it's just like, this needed to be said. I'm so glad that you said it. It's something that everybody thinks, but nobody has said it, and it goes so much against the, what the establishment says is the correct thing to do. So that's why I mentioned the story about my article being rejected, and then it turned out that I've gotten positive feedback about it. But basically, what I'm not going to go. You can read it on my blog, pediatricinc.com. It's only about 4 or 5 blog posts down. And in essence, what I talk about is that first of all, we have to keep in mind that the people that I was writing to were essentially residents that were getting out of school, and they were going to find a job. So we've interviewed our fair share of residents, and one of the questions that comes out at the very beginning is, how soon can I, or what's the partnership track like, or how soon can I make partner? And I've always been uncomfortable with that question, because in the piece I talk about it. I use the analogy of if you're going out, on a date, on your first date with somebody, and then you're asking them about marriage right then and there. It's like, well, you don't know me, and I don't know you, and you're already asking us to that we're going to be merging all kinds of stuff together. So that right there off the bat, I was kind of like a warning, like, don't be bringing that up, because you might not even want to be a partner of this practice, quite frankly. The second thing is that I write about, it's like, well, the increased responsibility, which I'm sure is okay, but I think a big part that new residents or residents forget. When you become a partner, now you assume a lot of the responsibilities of that practice. So it's very important to understand, how much debt that practice has, or how well run it is, because now all of a sudden your name gets put on all the loans, which could be very scary, right? So my point is that the reason why partners would want a partner, especially a young partner to come along, isn't really, they're not going to be thrilled about sharing the pot of gold, which, by the way, there isn't one, but whatever's left over, they're not thrilled about that. What they're really thrilled about is that all of a sudden you have another person that's responsible for for the cost. So let's just keep it simple. if you had 4 partners and you owe $100,000, each one would be 25%. If now you have a 5th partner, now everybody's responsible for 20% of that $100,000. And that's really why you would want a partner, is to spread the workload, to spread the cost, and then okay, we'll give you something at the end for being a partner. And so, at the very end, my conclusion was that if, considering all the work, all the liability that you're going to assume, and the frustration of working with old-time people that don't think the way you do, is not really worth it. And if you're that driven, then my suggestion is to go ahead and open up your own practice, and maybe even have the partners that you want to have, as opposed to being adopted into a partnership family that you perhaps are not like-minded with. And there's other things that I talk about. I mean, it's just like, okay, now you're a partner, but just because you're a partner doesn't necessarily mean that you have influence in that group. So the senior partner's been there for 30, 40 years, and just because you're a young whippersnapper, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden, your ideas, and Chip, I'm sure that you've heard about this all the time, I hear it in conferences all the time, saying, and people even email me, it's like, I'm a new partner, this practice isn't going well, or I have all these changes, they don't code very well, they could be saving a lot more money, or there's other services that we could offer that we're not doing it, and the partners won't budge. Or we want to buy an EMR, but nobody can get together and think about which is the best EMR. And so everything is a stalemate because there's 4 partners, 2 are on one side, 2 on the other, and nothing ever gets done. And that's basically what the premise of my article was about. So anyways, it's gotten a lot of talk, and I think that you mentioned that there was a few things that you wanted to add, as well as some things that you perhaps didn't agree with me, which I highly doubt that. But
yeah.
let's
ultimately, you and I have similar conclusions. I do think that if I were to give advice to residents and about which practices to consider working for and so forth, I would have them actually ask the partnership question. But here's why, and I'll use your analogy. You compared it to dating, like asking that partnership question right away is like bringing up marriage right away. I do actually think that's kind of important for the same reason when you're in the single scene. Neither Brandon or I would know anymore, but I imagine that when you go downtown and go to the bars, if you just want to hook up and you don't want to settle down and have kids and buy a house, it's kind of nice to know that the person on the other side of the equation is in the same boat you are. Because if you are looking to settle down and have kids, and the partner on the other side that you're engaging with does not want that, that leads to tears and broken hearts. And so it's not. If I owned a practice, I would be encouraged by a physician who wants to know if it's possible. All right, if your practice says, if your practice is owned by one person, it will always only ever be owned by one person. That's the sort of thing I think new hirees and your practice need to make clear to each other. If I'm hiring you, partnership is not in my long-term goals for you. That's as far as it goes. I think saying to anyone, for both parties, oh, if you come work for us and you don't burn the building down, you will be expected to be partner within 3 years, or you are automatically on the partnership track. I think that's a mistake. I've never understood that concept. I know plenty of people who do it. It doesn't work, in my opinion. It doesn't work for law firms. It doesn't work for practices. And here's why. And so I think, Brandon, this is where you and I agree. Automatic partnership, being automatically on the partnership path doesn't work because, A, not every physician is partner material. I've had just as many calls, Brandon, from people who say, I hired some physicians when I started, and now they're partners, and now I wish they weren't partners with me because they don't carry the load. They aren't interested in doing the extra work to be autonomous. They just want a third of the money. And I think you and I agree wholly on that. Not every physician is a good partner. And to the physicians, I say, not every practice you want to be partnered with. You don't want to wake up to find out that your new partners who've been in business for the last 20 years have been creating bad chart notes and overcoding, because now suddenly you own 20% of those toxic assets.
Yeah.
That's an issue I've been dealing with a lot this quarter.
Well, let me jump in here real quick about the question, and going back to the dating scene. You wouldn't come out and say, are you looking to get married, right, at the beginning. You would start by getting to know the person, right, and then just asking questions and where you're at, and you're having conversations. So I think that, so I understand your point that it's very important because you want to make sure that you're not wasting your time.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that it's a wiser approach to go and spend time with the practice as much as you can, and ask the other guys. I'm like, are you a partner? How long did it take you to be a partner? What does your job entail? And you can kind of find out how things are, working, or if there's, you'll find out immediately if the partners don't get along, right?
Right.
So just the same way in the dating scene, where you want to understand if that person is in the same boat that you are, just so you don't waste time and it's not just simply a hookup. I think that's an important part of just taking the time to explore the practice before you start asking the question, well, how soon can I become a partner, or how soon, because that's the mentality. It's like, okay, 3 years, I'm in. Without,
right. I think the question to ask is not that as the practice you want to hear is not how soon can I become a partner. The question really is, what's the normal track for partner? What have you done historically, and what are your expectations? Because you may find out I can become a partner if I do X, Y, and Z in 2 years, but you may not be ready to be a partner. You might be needing to raise your kids. You might want to take some time off. You might not be able to commit the time required to be a partner. And you and I are fundamentally agreeing. Bad partners are worse than no partners.
Yeah.
and for both.
A little insight on what we've done, because you mentioned that there are some practices that they don't want partners. We generally lean towards the side of not having partners. However, here's the little caveat. We understand that for us to get the type of, and we haven't had to cross this bridge yet, but for us to get the type of person that I would want to have in the practice, we need to have some sort of partnership track. So I worked with the Verding Group, we worked with the Verding Group to set up a path to partnership. And so what we've done is that by the time that, let's go say 3 to 5 years, by the time those years come along, the partnership candidate, if you will, is already working like a partner to some extent. So there's no need to make the decision whether or not that person is ready for partnership, but they have already achieved or they've already reached certain benchmark or achieved certain threshold. They've already demonstrating certain characteristic that qualifies them to be a partner. And it's not a secret. We're very clear about this is the expectations, and we won't sit down at the table until we have that you are demonstrating a certain capacity, and you're willing to take certain risk, and you're willing to go the extra mile for the practice and all this other stuff. Because at the end of the day, when the staff, which happens from time to time, forgets to forward the lines to go to our entering service, guess who has to wake up sometimes? It's like, Brandon, I haven't gotten a call in I don't know, several hours. Like, we call our phone number, and it's like ring, 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 ring. Nobody ever picks up. It doesn't go to. So guess who has to go up in the middle of the night on a Sunday, whatever, and turn on the thing. And we need somebody like that, right? I mean, it's not just all the profits and like that share it and I want to work part time and make full time money. So there's a lot of things that goes involved, and that's kind of how we've set it up. And the people that we've chosen so far have chosen not to go down that path, which is perfectly fine, because they want to have more children, they want to work part time. There's all these other things that they've considered, which I think is great. So we haven't written it off, but we don't necessarily lean automatically towards bringing a partnership, because I think I've just seen, there are exceptions, of course, but I've just seen partnerships destroy practices. I don't know what your experience is, Chip, but I have. of course, there are exceptions. Partnerships get along very well, but they're usually pretty, the expectations are well set. They're very clear. Everything is written out very clear on how things should act or things should go about depending on certain circumstances. But when they have these partnerships that were kind of put together and they haven't had clear guidelines, I mean, those destroy practices. Would you agree with this?
I find that choosing your business partner when you're in a practice together is about as important a decision as choosing your spouse. You're going to spend as much time with this person as your spouse, especially if you're a working physician. And the problems that you have, many of them are the same. There are a few key ones that are not the same, but you are still going to argue about money, and you're still going to argue about who does the chores. And if you choose poorly, you're going to be miserable. And one of the things you mentioned, I just want to highlight, I really want to encourage people that if you are going to hire a clinician of any kind in your practice, it's such a momentous thing. Why not have them come in and shadow someone for 2 or 3 days, or even a week? Pay them top dollar, pay them $200 an hour, okay, to come in and shadow for 2 or 3 days, because if they're the right person, that's money well spent. If they're not the right person, that's even better money well spent to learn that before they come in. There's nothing worse than finding a month into your new hire that this isn't the right person. And it becomes really tricky when you're talking about hiring physicians, because so often, not always, but so often, this physician needs to commit to move there. There's credentialing. There's all sorts of overhead. It's not just like hiring a new front desk person.
Absolutely.
And the more you get to know each other before you take that big leap, the more secure you should be with your decision. And so I think it's a tricky thing.
It's very important. I know it's difficult with the physician because, like you said, they often come from a different town and they want to know that they have the job before they're moving. So it becomes very difficult. But recently I saw an article about Amazon paying up to $5,000 for people, because you're saying pay them top dollars to spend some time, and how well investment that is. And actually Zappos used to do this, and I bet you that's where they got the idea. But Amazon was paying up to $5,000 for people to quit. So
yeah, Zappos it's like 20. I think it's like 20 or something crazy.
20? I thought it was $5,000. Anyway, so I mean, I think that's a great strategy, because you're getting, the people that don't want to be there, will take the money and go, and no questions asked, and those people are just not engaged. So you don't want non-engaged people. So spending the money, for a potential candidate to come, I think is a good investment. In paying them to come out and spend a week with you before you eventually hire them. I think it's a great idea. In fact, we do that for our staff, and it's interesting that they'll do very well in all the interviews, and they'll break apart during the shadowing day.
Yeah, I just worked with a practice
to hire somebody, but then the shadowing day just because it's really hard to maintain the same. When you're, I think Chris Rock was one that said is that when you're going out on the first day, you're not really meeting that person. You're meeting that person's representative.
Right.
When you're in a job interview, same thing. You're meeting the representative of the person. But it's hard to maintain that over several interviews, and then in the shadowing day, you can't just maintain that level of representation.
Yeah. I just worked with a practice who had to fire someone after 2 weeks, and she had a great resume, was really pretty good in the interviews, shadowed even for a day, 2 days, and the staff was not forthcoming to the office manager about their misgivings. So they shadowed, and part of the shadowing process involves like the office manager coming to the staff and saying, so, how was she?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, she was fine, she'll do the job. But it turned out, literally, I'm not exaggerating, like a week into the job, she's on eBay all the time, she's on Facebook all the time, and everyone is like, we all do that from time to time, but not in our first week on the job. Yeah. And other things started falling apart, so they had to let her go within the month. And the lesson they learned internally was that the staff needs to be better about communicating to the office manager. So if you are going to do a shadowing program, everyone needs to provide some input. And by the way, I just looked it up. I was off by a factor of 10. Zappos pays people $2,000 to quit, and Amazon just a couple weeks ago announced that they would be paying people $5,000 to quit, new hires. Of course, I think we have very few readers who would say, "Oh, I'll do that right now." You really need to think through what it is that Amazon is saying. They're basically saying, if you work here, it's because you really want to work here.
Yep.
You're not just picking up a job. You're not just filling in. I can think of
many that message, but we don't have the $5,000 to offer people. But we tell them, they'll ask me. It's like, "Oh, Brandon, it'll be midday," and then it's like, "Oh, can we go home?" And I'm like, "You can go home at any time you want. I mean, nobody's holding you hostage here.
Right.
So if you want to leave, leave if that's what you really want to do." And I don't get that anymore. This was in the beginning. They're like, "Oh, we get the rest of the day off." And I'm like, "If you want the rest of the day off, then go ahead. I'll have to go find somebody because I do need somebody here. But
right.
So your job might not be here, but nobody's holding you back from leaving. I mean, let's be clear about that.
You're not prisoners.
Yeah, nobody's a prisoner here. So yeah.
Well, and it just, I don't think, unfortunately in medicine, at least in pediatrics, I don't know about other specialties, there isn't a great culture of shadowing and how to be introduced to the right practice. It'd be neat if we all started it and encourage more people to do it. But I need more of that. I know too many practices who hire. I know practices who hire based on resumes, a couple phone calls, and a reference or two.
Yeah.
And how do you hire a clinician that way? That to me that's crazy to me. I'll tell you something.
How do you hire? I've done it.
So you're crazy, Brandon.
Our process is so long. We have a very lengthy interview process, and I don't know if I've mentioned it here on everything that we do.
Actually, we did an entire podcast about it early. Yeah.
We have a very lengthy interview process, and we do that on purpose. It's painful sometimes because we need desperately the body, but we have exercised lots of discipline in making sure that we don't hire the wrong person. And the other day I was very proud of my staff because we desperately needed a couple of bodies. In fact, we still do. And after the shadowing day, the two staff members that were kind of shadowing with this person, they said it's not going to work out. And I said, well, these are our last two candidates. We're going to have to start all over again, and you guys are going to be on your own here in the back for a long period of time. And they said, we would rather work, pick up the extra slack by ourselves than to work with that person, to work with that person. She's just not going to, work out. So I said, okay. I mean, that's all I needed to know. So we did. And also, another thing that I've been trying to hammer down with my staff, this is kind of a new step that we've been going to, because they're coming to me also like, so-and-so is on Facebook, so-and-so is doing this, so-and-so is doing that. And I said, I can correct that as the manager, I can say, but I tell you what will really resonate with the employee is when your peers call you out on it. So I always reference, like in baseball, before the manager goes out to the mound to talk to the pitcher, who goes up there first? The catcher, or maybe the first base, second base, or whoever, and talk to the guy, calm him down, give him the support that he needs. And then at the very end is when the manager steps in. So there's this. I'm trying to get them to. It's like, you can enforce these rules. You know what the culture is, and you're telling me it's wrong. So already. So why can't you call out, amongst the peers? Just say, hey, listen, around here we don't check our phones. That's a rule that we have, and we don't do it. We think it looks bad. It doesn't go with our values. It doesn't go with our thing. So instead of me reprimanding and going in there, it has a lot more meaning when the team actually calls people, specifically, as opposed to me jumping in.
First of all, the episode where we discussed this was episode 5. That's how far back ago. So for those of you who watch religiously, and there's some of you, it's episode 5. At PCC, what we do when we hire support people, actually sometimes for some other positions, but we need support people, and let's say we run an ad in the paper and we get 30 resumes and 3 or 4 of them get through our process, and we only have 2 slots for 4 people. We'll hold an ice cream social. We all get the email, 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, come on down, ice cream social, and everyone walks down. We all make our own sundaes, and the 3 people who are dressed up, the 4 people who are dressed up, those are the potential new employees.
Yeah,
and
you can spot
figure
them
out
out from a mile away.
Yeah, you can figure out in about 30 seconds who's going to work well at PCC and who won't. I mean, it so quickly lets you figure out who's engaging, who's going to talk, and the assumption is if they've gotten to this point in the process, they've checked off all the other boxes. These are the best people. The folks who have a hard time working with our crew, they get spotted very quickly, and it's been a little while since we've done one, I think, but that I was always impressed by how well that worked.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we should think about more. And I'm trying to do it. It's hard, but and we're still learning. I mean, we're still learning certain things. But there's no assurance, right? I mean, you really don't know who you have until you have them. So
until they're there, yep.
Screen them, and you try to do like that hire. That they did as much as they can. They did things well, and then. Once the person started talking, but I think once the person started working, then they realized other things. But that's happened in the past with us, and I just told them, you guys need to enforce the culture. I do a talk on team cohesion, and one of the things is about holding each other accountable, not so much the captain, the leader, the boss. There is a responsibility from the team to hold each other accountable. And in sports, you see this very well. In sports, you see when somebody, makes a bad play or whatever, you'll have the team, like, what are you doing? You didn't cover that person, or you have the team holding each other accountable, and the coach doesn't necessarily always need to be involved. So I'm trying to do that. It's like, hey guys, you need to enforce some of these rules. I can't be every day, You obviously know what needs to be done because you're emailing me and telling me why what they're doing is wrong. So just turn it around and tell them.
Right. All right, Brandon, I think we've compiled enough for a pretty substantial episode today. We covered 2 good subjects. Almost cut right down the middle with our little technical problem there, but we'll do that together.
Merge those 2 videos.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. All right, thanks. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.